What challenges do we face in the modern workplace? And the balance that we are all seeking to achieve is between employer empathy and employee resilience. There is a challenge in both. Employers are not necessarily always the most empathetic of people. Employees, sadly, are not always resilient enough to deal with employer expectations. This came to the fore when you will recall the incident of the young EY employee who unfortunately was not able to cope with what allegedly was an excessive workload. And this is widely quoted in popular media, and it was there in the news for quite some time. It brought the problems to the fore, the challenges that people, especially young people emerging from universities and from study, were facing in workplaces, balancing their own needs with that of the workplace. What underlies all this is stress. And stress, of course, can imply a range of circumstances from ordinarily workplace issues to familial dissonance or serious mental disturbance. But what is central to all manner of stress genesis is the yawning gap between expectation and reality. What we expect from a workplace and what the reality of the workplace is. What the workplace expects from us and what the reality is of what we are able to provide. What is stress then? Events and situations that make us feel tense, under pressure, anxious, angry, and a bodily response that we feel towards these situations. An increased heart rate, muscle tension, bowel or bladder overactivity, and a sense of nervous energy. And while stress can affect all of us, those who are sensitive, those who worry more, are easily affected by their external environment. These are the people who are more prone to it. Now, is it normal to experience stress? And believe me, some stress is a normal physiological and psychological response. It prepares our mind and body to danger, and it enables defensive action. It motivates us to perform better, to achieve our goals, to set new ones, and fuels creativity. It is normal, therefore, for most people to experience some stress when confronted with difficult situations or life events. How does stress operate? And I'm going to ask you to look at our visual guide, and you will see this picture of the brain, the eyes that are looking at the snake. This is, of course, a man on a hike. And what happens when your eyes see a snake while on a hike? The messages are carried to your thalamus. The thalamus is a coordinator, a connector. The information goes from there to the back of your brain, what's called your visual cortex. And it's your visual cortex that recognizes that what you're seeing is a snake. This triggers your emotion center, the amygdala. And as a consequence of this circuit being set in your brain, you then have a fight or flight response. In fact, a fight, flight, or freeze response. You either stand and fight the snake, beat it with your stick, you run away from it, or you freeze and hope for the best because you've gone into inaction. All these are possible responses, but there is a whole brain process that takes place. This is a beautiful diagram from Netter that tells you what the brain process is. This is an example of a very specific incident where you understand what caused you stress. You will go back from the hike to where you're staying. You'll talk to your friends. You'll tell them what happened. Oh my God, I came across the snake and this is how I felt. But stress can be chronic. Stress can become persistent. Stress can need medical attention when it provokes anxiety, irritability, changes in mood, emotional unrest, restlessness, or indeed physical symptoms that are unremitting and have no apparent cause. Now, how does an emotional stress lead to physical symptoms? And this is what Freud had said. The human tendency is to repress emotional conflicts. But these conflicts don't go away. They are firmly rooted in your unconscious mind. It's like you swept the dirt under a carpet. It's not left the room. When unacceptable or repressed emotions of this nature transcend to the consciousness, they are then converted to a physical symptom, said Freud. And this is what he meant when he said conversion. Physical symptoms of stress affects all the different organs of our body. So you can have palpitations, increased heart rate, you can have tightness in the chest, you can have a dry mouth, you can have labored breathing, you can have tinglings in your hands and feet, you can feel lightheaded, you can have the urge to urinate or defecate even, you can have tremors. All these are consequences of stress. And if you are looking at the visual guide, you will understand that what determines this is what's called your autonomic nervous system. This is the silent part of your nervous system that links your brain with your internal organs, and it therefore controls all these different experiences that you have. And when your autonomic nervous system goes into arousal mode, that is when you have the physical symptoms of stress. When you meet that snake on a hike, you have autonomic arousal, and that's what makes your heart beat fast, your hands and legs tremble, for you to sweat, for you to shake. All this happens as a consequence of that autonomic arousal. When stress is chronic, when your autonomic nervous system is constantly aroused, you end up with other problems. Hypertension is one of those examples. Diabetes is another example of what happens when you are under chronic stress. You eat poorly when you're in chronic stress. You end up therefore gaining weight and becoming obese. Your cholesterol can go out of whack, and you can get what we call hurry, worry, and curry. Your tummy is upset. Irritable bowels or constipation become consequences. And the prevention of these chronic diseases actually requires the management of stress. And stress, of course, is a very common component of workplace dissonance. When we are not comfortable in our workplace, when we are struggling in our workplace, what happens to us is we experience chronic stress, and chronic stress spoils our health in the way that I have been describing to you. One very important sign of your autonomic nervous system not doing very well is when you have what we call postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or orthostatic hypotension. Now, what happens? When you stand up, your blood pressure and your heart rate are supposed to correct themselves automatically. But in people who have an autonomic nervous system dysfunction, this does not happen. They end up experiencing less blood to the brain, dizziness, visual disturbances, loss of consciousness even, and sometimes cognitive fogging. Very often, there's also less blood to the muscle, leading to what we call a coat hanger headache. Imagine a headache that is distributed between the back of your head, the back of your skull, your neck, and your shoulder in the same shape as a coat hanger. Less blood to the kidneys leads to oliguria, the need to evacuate your bladder frequently. And orthostatic hypotension, your blood pressure falls by more than 20 beats systolic and 10 beats of diastolic, or your pulse rate rises by more than 30 beats per minute. Now, stress, therefore, is not just a psychological phenomenon, it's a physical phenomenon, and And we are talking about it in the context of a mindful workplace because chronic stress causes physical symptoms and ill health. And many people in workplaces that do not suit them or for which they are not suited are experiencing chronic stress, and as a consequence, they are on a journey towards ill health, if not already unwell. So let's go back and think about this young lady. It was her first job, and she was thrilled to join the company, her mother wrote. She worked tirelessly, giving all her to meet the demands placed on her. However, the workload, the new environment, and the long hours took a toll on her physically, emotionally, and mentally. She began experiencing anxiety and sleepless nights and stress. She kept pushing herself, believing that hard work and perseverance were the keys to success. All this also tells us the genesis of a psychological conflict. The presumption is that the dissonance that one is feeling is what results in creating so much anxiety at the conscious level that it gets converted into a physical symptom. And the physical symptom has its genesis in that entire unconscious process that is going on. Now, all this takes us back to some early psychological experiments and data. One very important concept in stress is the concept of learned helplessness. This was seen in the post-World War assembly line workers. And if you've seen Great Expectations, Charlie Chaplin, you will remember this. The person had no control over the nature or pace of work. They were engaged in repetitive tasks for hours on end. The assembly line would start when it had to start, would stop when it had to stop, and you would have to repetitively do what you were supposed to do ever so often. You had no control over it starting, you had no control over it stopping. Now this brought in that feeling of learned helplessness. And one of the early experiments of Skinner that showed us what learned helplessness was when he put mice into two connecting cages. In one cage, he would shock the mice in a predictable way, so much so that the mice learned that he could go and live in the other cage and be safe. In the other experiment, he would shock the two cages unpredictably. And this resulted in the mouse developing all human symptoms of depression, cowering in a corner, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat, shivering with fear, tremendously anxious. And this learned helplessness is what happens to people when you take away control over their circumstances. Now, the IT and corporate revolution has, if you think about it, ushered in a new generation of assembly line workers. They operate on international time, they respond to international demands, they have little control over their workspaces, and their time schedules seldom match those of their families and friends. Now, if this is not learned helplessness, what is? Let's ask ourselves that question. The other very important stress concept is locus of control. An internal locus of control is where you feel in control of your circumstances. And this actually is protective from emotional stress. An external locus of control is where you're controlled by your circumstances, and that makes you very vulnerable to stress. So people with an internal locus of control believe they are in control and are able to take responsibility for their own actions. People with an external locus of control blame external forces for their own circumstances. Now, if you relate this back to the young lady who was not able to cope with her workplace, she had no control over her circumstances. She had no control over the amount of work she was asked to do, the timeline she was asked to meet. and that put her in firmly a position of being tremendously stressed, one where there was a complete external locus of control, and the other where she felt a feeling of learned helplessness. Then, of course, I often talk about the concept of multiple intelligences of Howard Gardner and how it is so important to help people play towards their own intelligences. And one aspect for employers to always be mindful of, apart from employees to think about, is the person that we are looking at. Is this person playing towards his intelligences? Is he or she in a position to find their potential, or the role that we have chosen for them or they have chosen for themselves, are they a misfit? No one is incapable. All of us are intelligent in unique ways. So the question is not whether we are smart, it is how we are smart. And I want to draw you again to the visual guide to this podcast, where we talk about the different kind of intelligences: naturalistic, spatial, musical, logical reasoning, interpersonal, bodily kinesthetic, linguistic, and intrapersonal, and define how each one of these plays out. It's important to remember that each one of us has at least 3 different types of these intelligences, and when we choose a job or a vacation, or when we are chosen for a particular role, we need to play towards those intelligences in fulfilling that role. And the role needs to be one that helps us play towards our intelligences. Then there is the question, are you self-actualized? That's the question to you. To the workplace, the question is your employee self-actualized? We go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We all have physiological needs at the very bottom: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. These are needs that we all have which need to be met. Then we have safety needs, and very often this is what the employer puts on the table for us: personal security, employment, resources, health, property. Going to a job, earning a salary is what helps us build this safety net for ourselves and our families. Then, of course, we have love and belonging needs. We all need friendship, intimacy, family, a sense of connection. And while this largely is personal, and we are expected to find this outside our workplace setting, we also seek it in our workplace setting. We seek the empathy of colleagues and superiors. We seek some degree of affection, some signs of affection. For example, celebrating an important event like a birthday. These things are extremely important from a workplace perspective. Then there is, of course, one's self-esteem. We all need to be respected. We all need to feel a sense of status, recognition, strength, and freedom. Does our workplace engender these feelings? Do we have these opportunities? And then, of course, with all this, we become self-actualized. We all desire to be the most that one can be, and that feeling that everything is going well and I'm doing extremely well and nothing can be better is that feeling of self-actualization. Of course, there is a higher, more philosophical version of self-actualization that Maslow probably alluded to, but at the very base level, this is the kind of self-actualization that most of us seek. So in this hierarchy of needs, it's not just us who is responsible. It's not just our families and loved ones and friends who are responsible. It is also in part our workplace, ensuring that our safety needs, our love and belonging needs, and our self-esteem needs are met. And this is so crucial. Now, when you're faced with a stressful situation, whether it's in your workplace or out of it, now there are 2 ways out of it. One can either modify the situation, you can bring about a change in the situation, or you can modify your expectations. Example, you're working with a boss who's very short-tempered. You can either work to make your boss less short-tempered, well, good luck with that, or you can work to accept that this is how this person is and I'm going to work my way around that. Now, no prizes for guessing which is the easier pathway here. And one of the best ways to manage stress, therefore, is to imbibe this one lesson. When you cannot modify the situation, modify your expectations. Now, of course, there's another very interesting way in which you can modify the situation. You can simply leave the workplace. But that is not always a solution for our problems. There are other things that we need to do in order to prevent stress and maintain positive mental health. We all need social support systems. In part, they come from friends and family. In part, they come from our workplace. And the workplace needs to engender that opportunity for us to develop our social support systems. Support from friends and family gives us emotional sustenance, tangible resources, aid, and information. Other things that we can do is be a member of a club or society, develop a hobby, join an interest group, join groups where we support other people, illness support groups, or indeed religious or spiritual groups, or be part of sports or recreation club. All this can be very, very helpful in managing our stress and in being able to maintain positive mental health. Owning a pet can be very stress relieving, and this is something that is highly recommended for people, especially those who are battling loneliness. Workplaces can develop inbuilt support systems for all those who are vulnerable to stress. And I think this is increasingly important in a world where people are feeling isolated or lonely to the point where they feel unsupported. And it falls on the workplace to provide opportunities for them to derive some support. Other things that help you maintain positive mental health, including leading a healthy and predictable life, a healthy diet, regular exercise, adequate rest and sleep, scheduling and planning your activities, learning to delegate, asking other people to do things for you in a very reasonable way and trusting them to do it, and being able to moderate all that you do. A very good example of moderation, for example, is alcohol, where a little bit may even be good for you. And I now talk about the Mediterranean diet, where, for example, a glass of wine twice a week, red wine in particular, has been thought to be good. But of course, too many glasses of wine is definitely not good for you. Moderation, therefore, is the key. Simple things that help people maintain positive health and mental health include aerobic exercise, yoga, meditation, relaxation training, entering a counseling relationship with a professional, having that person to talk to when you're struggling or going through stress, massages and other stress-relieving measures, and for many, religious or spiritual pursuits. It's very important for workplace today to be aware of mental health, and I think the need to understand the signs of depression, for example, low mood, crying spells, helplessness, not sleeping very well, changes in the appetite, thoughts of suicide. This is very, very important. People who are depressed often become more quiet. They often seem more tired. They look like they've lost their appetite. They stop meeting your gaze. They're looking at the ground all the time. They seek to be alone a lot of the time. They're not able to smile in a consistent way. They tend to be blank when you look at them and try talking to them. They struggle to stay engaged in conversation. They become emotionally distant. They seem apathetic, not very interested in what's going on. And it's very important that if we do find a co-worker or an employee in our workplace struggling with these types of symptoms, we actually take the trouble to engage with them, ask them out for a cup of coffee, have a chat, try and find out if they are okay, try and find out if they are getting some help. All of this is extremely important. Workplace accidents people who decide to do things that are inappropriate and obviously destructive, it always follows having long-standing mental health issues which have not been recognized or addressed, and they don't seem to be getting any help or support. So it's important to talk about mental health. Mental health is an invisible disability, and because we are not able to see that there is something wrong, we often ignore it. Please don't underestimate your power to help someone who is suffering. All of us can sometimes get to a point where we reach that nadir. We feel overwhelmed, and as in the case of that young lady, which was very well reported in the press some time ago, it's an example of people getting overwhelmed by stress and emotions, resulting in an impulsive act. And it's very, very important, therefore, to remember that life is precious, and it's very important, therefore, to identify if someone is reaching their nadir and they're experiencing a death wish. Is stress necessary at all? Quite honestly, some stress is necessary in order for human beings to survive. Too much stress, on the other hand, can be non-productive and wasteful, resulting in much negative energy being expended. What we must try and achieve, therefore, is a fine balance between ambition and motivation on the one hand and equanimity of mind on the other. I had asked this question in a mental health group of professionals that I'm part of my alumni actually, and a consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist in the UK, Dr. Madhu Keval Ramani, said this: I also think modern life, with the need for working at odd hours thanks to IT advances and working on 24-hour time scales, has gradually eroded recognition and respect for the basic rhythms of life, whether circadian or psychosocial. And I think that this is something about work-life balance that we all need to keep in mind. It's very, very important for us to have a reasonable work-life balance so that we don't burn out. What are the 5 steps, therefore, that you can take towards your stress management? Recognize the genesis of your psychological conflict. That's where your stress is coming from. Very often we remain unaware of where it's coming from. Develop your own coping strategies. If you can't modify the situation that's causing you stress, learn to modify your expectations. Try to regain your internal locus of control and learn to cherish it. It's very important that you feel you are engaged in activity that you determine and you are the master of. Work towards self-actualization. Remember, contentment and fulfillment do not necessarily require power or material gain. Nurture and cherish your support systems, family, friends, hobbies and activities. These are the things that give your life real meaning, very often beyond work. And of course, this balance of employer empathy and employee resilience, this is the one that is the hardest to achieve, and it's going to challenge societies for years to come, but one that one needs to work towards. What is the role of the physician in all this? And I go to an old Hindu proverb: in illness, the physician is a father; in convalescence, a friend; when health is restored, he is a guardian. And Samuel Coleridge said this: in the treatment of nervous cases, he is the best physician who is the most ingenious inspirer of hope. So let's remain hopeful and positive, and let's all work towards a stress-free, mindful existence and a mindful workplace. Do like and share our podcast if you like this one. We are on Apple, Spotify and YouTube. If you'd like to follow the visual guide to our podcast, do choose the YouTube visual guide version of the podcast. And of course, do look at, if you're interested in the brain and mind, do look at all our other efforts to bring this information to you. Thank you for listening.